I shall try as far as I may to unveil the mystery of that mystical power without using any symbols or allegorical expressions, as many of the modern writers do when discussing the mystical forces, whereby they only try to hide their superficial knowledge of the matter. The name of Kundalini derives its origin from the word kundala, meaning coiled. Therefore, this power is called the Serpent power, having been known to all nations. We shall also name it so. In India, the Serpent power is known as the goddess Kundalini. She is consequently of the feminine sex, her form resembling a coiled serpent asleep. And she is asleep until she has been aroused by yoga practice, which is called after her the Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini is the Shabda Brahman, that is, divine cosmic energy in bodies. Avalon, the Serpent power, page 1. This form of yoga is, however, in particular associated with the Tantras or Agamas, firstly because these scriptures are largely concerned therewith. In fact, such orderly descriptions in practical full detail as have been written are to be found chiefly in the Hatha Yoga works and Tantras, which are the manuals, not only of Hindu worship, but of its occultism. Tantra means a net and is a special form of yoga, according to which letters and syllables are practiced. But the tantric scripts have in Europe a very bad reputation, owing to the fact that certain theosophical authors have held them identical with the black magic, which of course is quite wrong. As already mentioned, the serpent power is at the base of the spine, in a particular mystical center, and not a bodily one. This center is named chakra, and resembles a 4-petaled lotus. Such chakras are 7 in the human body, as is to be seen from the table on the next page. The lowest center is called in India Muladhara. The serpent power is in the Muladhara center and can be awakened by the mystical fire, i.e. the concentration on our inner divinity, or by the repetition of letters in thought, or by any of the other Indian methods. When the serpent power has been awakened, she gradually enters the chakras, which is connected with particular sensations, and sometimes it involves considerable pain. When the serpent power has entered the Anahata center, i.e. the heart lotus, then the turning point has been reached, as the further ascent is very difficult. Once aroused, the serpent power does not at once ascend to the highest center, but gradually enters the 7 centers, the latter being identical with the mystical ladder. It is Jacob's ladder, which the angels ascended and descended. It is the ladder known to all Egyptian investigators to be a particular symbol found in the excavations on the papyri and among the inscriptions on the temples and sepulchres. Later on we shall read its description by Kerning. It is enormously difficult to make the serpent power ascend the last 3 centers, but according to Avalon, there are experts in India able to do so within 1 hour, and then that mystical power returns to the lowest center and is to be aroused again each time. Of course, each time it grows easier, but the purpose has not been attained until the serpent power is retained in the head top in the Sahasrara center for a certain time, of which I shall speak later. As is to be seen from the annexed table, the number of the petals of the mystical lotus corresponds with the number of letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. According to the tantric scripts, the yogi has to repeat in each of the mentioned centers those letters which are on the petals of the lotus in the respective center. This practice is called mantra. It is therefore evident that the letter practice has been known long in India. Through this practice, the yogis arouse the greatest of the mystical powers, i.e. the Kundalini, who on entering the Sahasrara center effects her union with Brahma, or the divine spirit. this being identical with the alchemical marriage of the Western mystics. But as with the Western mystics, the bride is called the Virgin Sophia, the divine wisdom. It follows that thereby is meant the divine soul of the man Buddhi, who is nothing else than the yogi's sacred serpent power, or Kundalini, as we shall convince ourselves by the manifestation of the gospel. In the Indian scripts, one of the names of the serpent power is also Mantra Devata, i.e. the goddess of all mantras, the substance of which is the letters, being consequently the mother of the whole universe. A. Avalon writes in his book, The Serpent Power, "She is the mother of all, and not the child of any. She is the world consciousness as a whole. She, the subtlest of the subtle, holds within herself the mystery of the creation and the stream of ambrosia which flows from the attribulous Brahma. By her radiance, the universe is illumined, and by it, eternal knowledge is awakened. That is, she both binds the ignorant in the bondage of this worldly life, and is the means whereby liberation may be attained. Kundalini is the Shabda Brahman, the sound of God, and all mantras are her manifestation. The body of Kundalini is composed of the 50 letters, or sound powers. For this reason, it is said in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika that she gives liberation to yogis and bondage to the ignorant. For he who knows her knows yoga, and those who are ignorant of her yoga are kept in bondage of this worldly life. Her sweet murmur is like the indistinct hum of swarms of love-mad bees and the soft cadence of sweet harmonious music. The awakening of the serpent power is manifested to the student in different ways. All cannot be revealed, being the mystery of the mystical practice. But I will mention those stated by Avalon in his book. The student first perceives vivid flashes of lightning. Another infallible sign of the arousing of the serpent power is the humming of swarms of bees and a full series of other sounds, commencing with the chirping of a cricket to thundering and terrible thunderclaps. She maintains all the beings of the world by means of inspiration and expiration, and shines in the hollow of the Mula lotus like a chain of brilliant lights. Mantras are in all cases the manifestations of Kundalini herself, for she is all letters, all words, and all human languages. Hence mantras are used in the rousing of Kundalini. Words in themselves seem lifeless, but the mantra power which they embody is Siddha, magical power, that is the truth, incapable of teaching it. As soon as the serpent power has entered a center, the flower of the lotus in that center turns upward while it was turned downwards before. The aroused Kundalini causes that the prana, the vital power circulating before in 2 channels named Ida and Pingala, does so now in the middle channel, called Sushumna, while the 2 lateral channels get devitalized. When prana is in Sushumna, there is neither day nor night, for Sushumna devours time. The yogi has then entered eternity. Liberation is gained only when Kundalini takes up her permanent abode in the Sahasrara, so that she only returns by the will of the yogi. It is said that after staying in Sahasrara for a long time, some yogis lead the Kundalini back to the heart and worship her there. This is done by those who are unable to stay long in the Sahasrara. If one should die after attaining any of these stages, he is born again, having all the advantages of the stages gained, and will begin in his next birth where he has last left off. As is to be seen from the table annexed, the 6th lotus includes the mystical figures of the moon and sun. These figures appear in all times and in the most ancient scripts, meaning the royal marriage, i.e. the union of the soul with Jesus Christ. Likewise in the alchemical scripts, which are always of a twofold meaning, i.e. the alchemical and mystical, we meet with the same symbols of the royal marriage. The same is to be found in Gnostic scripts. I was therefore much surprised at finding this union of planets in Avalon's book, too, on the colored plates representing the different centers. This is the same proof that the mystical way is everywhere the same, its symbols being analogous in all times with all students. He who has aroused the serpent power and made it permanently stay in the Sahasrara becomes immortal in his body, at least until he chooses to leave it. Such a mystic is no more subject to any disease or age. On the other hand, it is known that many high initiates died of diseases or age. This apparent contradiction is explained by the fact that the liberation may be obtained either by the arousing of the serpent power, which is connected with the preservation of the material body, or without it, namely by the Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, or Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. If such a yogi practices without regard to the serpent power, trying to attain the liberation and union with God, he can attain it, though his body remains subject to death. When he is in samadhi, the serpent power is still sleeping in the lowest center. He cannot therefore die at will, though the hour of his death is known to him. From the above it results that the mere arousing of the serpent power, or its leading up to some higher centers, is considered from the yogi's point of view but a preliminary stage. Therefore no one should be surprised at learning that under our letter practice, or that at the silent concentration the serpent power is aroused very soon indeed. This is the very advantage of our practices, for they lead the student to the highest goal, and not only to the mere union of the spirit with the soul, as is the case with the different yogas. At the commencement of this chapter, I promise to explain the meaning of mantra. It is a magical formula, a prayer, sometimes a syllable, or a letter, to be repeated in a low voice or mentally by the student. The latter method comes into consideration with the mystical practice as described here. Each mantra is to be practiced until it resounds in the whole body. How this happens, the student will learn when practicing. Each other mantra is without any effect. Avalon writes on it as follows in his already cited work. There is perhaps no subject in the Indian scripts which is less understood than mantra. Commonly, Orientalists and others describe mantra as prayer, formulae, or worship, mystic symbols, and so forth. These are the superficialities of those who do not know their subject. Whilst I am not aware of any work in any European language which shows a knowledge of mantra and its science, yet there is perhaps no subject which has been so ridiculed, and not unusual attitude of ignorance. There is nothing necessarily holy or prayerful about a mantra. A mantra is power, which lends itself impartially to any use. A man may be injured or killed by mantra. By mantra, a kind of union with the physical Shakti is by some said to be affected by mantra. In the initiation called Vedhadiksha, there is such a transference of power from the guru to the disciple that the latter swoons under the impulse of it. By mantra, the home of fire may, and according to ideal conditions, should be lighted. By mantra, man is saved, and so forth. Mantra, in short, is a power which is thought, movement, vehicled by, and expressed in speech. The root man means to think. Of an extraordinary use to which mantra is put, I am informed by some worshippers of the Bhairava mantra. The man projects the mantra onto the woman, who then experiences the sensation of a physical union. The Vishnu Purana speaks of generation by willpower. As the Kularnava Tantra says, and as may be readily understood, such a guru is hard to get. The disciple who receives this initiation gets all the powers of his initiator. Those familiar with the Western presentment of similar subjects will more readily understand when I say that according to the Indian doctrine here described, thought, like mind, of which it is the operation, is a power of Shakti. It is therefore not only as real, but in a sense more real than outer material objects, which are themselves but the projections of the creative thought of the world thinker. The thought movement vehicled by and expressed in speech is mantra. Kundalini is a form of the supreme divine power who maintains all breathing creatures. She is the source from which all sound and energy, whether as ideas or speech, manifests. That sound matrika, when uttered, in human speech assumes the form of letters, and prose and verse, which is made of their combinations. This clearly shows the conformity of the Indian lore with the Christian conception of the word, as some quotations of European authors to be quoted later will confirm. This lore of the divine word was contained in almost all Gnostic systems, and it was thought that it revealed the secret being of the Godhead. The Gnostic Simon opposed the mouth, where the word is formed as a proper sphere of formation, to the improper sphere of formation, i.e. the woman's womb. Such an idea is either idle or vague, or is to be carried through to its consequences. But as the Gnostics attributed to the divine word the highest meaning, they could not but reach these results. Probably these were known not only to Macros, but to all Gnostics. Being, however, a secret lore, they were not handed down except in some obscure intimations, so that it may be an unlucky chance that only just that part of his teaching appertaining to the word of the Godhead has been handed down to us, for all that we are at least able to grasp the real essentials of the Gnostic lore of the Logos. The consequences resulting from the idea that the word is the divine word, and the mouth the sphere of its formation, are, according to W. Schultz, the following. If the world answered to the word, and the formation of the world to the formation of the word, and the latter to the formation of the child, then the parts of the world must be analogous to the parts of the word and the child. The parts of the world are the elements, the parts of the word are the letters, and the parts of the child are its limbs. Therefore the elements, the letters, and the limbs of the human body must correspond with each other in a mystical relation. The train of these ideas has been supported by the fact that both the letter and the element have one and the same name in the Hellenic language. Further, that the alphabet was composed of 24 letters, which could be allotted in sixes to the 4 elements, then that in the universe, the zodiac rested on the number of 12 constellations, to which the 24 letters could be applied in pairs. Thus, finally, human body was divided, as Macros shows us the division of the truth's body, into 12 parts, whereby the microcosmos, the man, came into the same relation with the letters as was the case with the macrocosmos, through the medium of the zodiacal signs. Further, it was considered that all events in the world and all thought might be expressed in words, the words thus being adapted to things and thoughts in full. Therefrom it was concluded that the dividing of the words into letters must answer to the dividing of things, and thoughts into the elements. Now let us turn to the mystical interpretation of the tarots. The tarot cards, supposed by many occultists to be the oldest book in the world, are also called the Book of Thoth, and are said to derive their origin from Egypt, and maybe from Atlantis. A pack is composed of 78 cards, of which 22 are the great arcana, mysteries, corresponding with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. In these arcana is contained the whole mystical evolution, but comprehensible to those only who know the way. In Egypt, the tarots are made out of metallic plates. Nowadays, they are altered and disfigured. As an example, I maintain that the card 18, so-called the lunar, was quite different on the tarots on the 14th century than today. Nowadays, this card has dogs painted thereon, while on the old one there were lions. From the mystical point of view, there is, of course, a great difference between the two symbols. Yet the symbols of importance have remained the same until now. The mystical way commences with the card 6. The cards 0 to 5 refer to the outer world. Number 1 is a magician. Number 2 is Isis. 3 an empress. 4 an emperor. Number 5 is the Pope. Card 0 represents a fool. It is the worldly man who has not yet taken up the mystical practice. On card 2, the picture of Isis represents the outward form of the religions. Card 6, Hercules on the crossroad. It represents the human soul on the crossroad. This card represents a youth between two ladies. The lady on his right bears a crown on her head, while she on the left has no crown at all. The card means the moment when the man decides either for the mystic, i.e. the right, or the magic, the left way. This card is wrongly called love, or amorousness. Card 7, a carriage. It is the spirit as the master of the body, the latter being represented by a carriage. The horses mean the thoughts. 8, justice. This card refers to the spiritual man who has commenced the practice. Card 9, a hermit. He is showing the way, holding a lamp in his hand and hiding it with his coat. In fact, he is not a hermit, but a mystical leader. In his right, he is holding a stick with 7 knots representing the 7 centers through which the serpent power rises upward. Card 10, the wheel of fate. This card represents the action of the karma. Card 11, power. It means the overcoming of the lower self, which is represented by a beast, a lion. This overcoming is attained by means of the concentration practice. Card 12, a gallows. This card ever was and is yet one of the most difficult riddles to the expounders of the tarots, for the majority do not comprehend it. It represents a young man hanging on the crossbar, placed on 2 trees. Between their stems he is hanging head down, tied by his foot, while his other foot is bent at its knee, the 2 legs thus forming a cross. The man hanging has his feet where another has his head. It seems we shall think in our feet as taught by Kerning, and in some Indian scripts of which I am going to quote but a section. The section to be quoted deals with the so-called nectar, also named ambrosia, that is the food of the gods, and which flows out of the moon, but in the ordinary human body it is swallowed by the sun, from which it follows that the human body grows old. According to the Indian idea, the moon is situated at the root of the palate, and is continually pouring downward a stream of the nectar, which, however, is swallowed up by the sun situated near the navel of the human body. But there is a most excellent proceeding to deceive the sun. This proceeding can be learnt only from a guru leader. The theological studies of a heap of books cannot explain this matter, for it is the mystery of the highest practice, not to be found in a script. As we see, the Indians preserve the deepest silence about it. But we have found the secret clue to it somewhere else. We will show it immediately. This position is called Viparita Karani, whereby we succeed in reversing both the sun and the moon, that is, the sun now near the navel, and the moon on the palate shall change their places. This can be learnt only from a guru. Card 13. This card means the mystical death. It represents a skeleton. All who have stepped on the path will sooner or later understand the meaning of this symbol. Card 14. This card is wrongly named Temperance. There is an angel pouring out a fluid from a golden vessel into a silver one. It is the symbol of pouring of the Holy Spirit into the soul. The spirit is represented by the golden vessel, this being an old symbol of all concerning the divinity, and the soul by a silver vessel. Card 15, the Devil. This card means the descent into hell and the so-called fire of the divine wrath, where no detailed explanation is given. It is on account of the mystical stages, which must not be published to avoid their profanation, and to make it impossible that people who have not experienced them should plume themselves on their knowledge. Card 16, the Liberation and the Rebirth. The card shows lightning striking into a tower which is collapsing, while out of its window a man is falling head first. His feet and hands form together with his body the shape of the Hebrew letter Hain, another mystical stage to be experienced by every student. 17. The baptism with water. There is a butterfly on a flower, and the sun and the 7 planets. Card 18. The baptism with blood. There is the moon out of which drops of blood are falling down. Card 19. The baptism with fire. There is the sun whence drops of fire are falling down on a couple. On some cards there are 2 lads embracing each other. And both the symbols represent the inner and the outer man, which is also the zodiacal sign of the twins. At the baptism with fire, the outward man is already nearing his divinity. 20. Resurrection. After the mystical death, the man gets resurrected in his new body, being aroused by Jesus Christ. Card 21 is called the world, but in fact means a mystical adept who has attained the highest goal. The correspondence of the cards with letters of the Hebrew alphabet is quite accidental. If the Hebrew letters had been in correspondence with the contents of the tarots, these cards could not have derived their origin from Egypt or Atlantis, but this is not the case. The alchemical works, at least the genuine ones, have another meaning concealed in their symbols and the chemical signs. As in the planetary figures, they describe the mystical way, but in such a veiled manner that a layman, and not initiated, cannot have the slightest notion thereof. The alchemical procedure, its preparation, its unfoldment, and the attainment of the goal that is the stone of the philosophers, are about preparation for the mystical practice, its evolution and the attainment of the end, i.e. of Jesus Christ. The mystical way is, however, a spiritual way, and consequently, the original, while the alchemical is but its reflection on the material plane. It is not to be forgotten that the rule stated on the emerald table of Hermes Trismegistus, that all above is like all below, comes here into force. Then as in the spiritual, so in the material world. To give evidence that alchemy was but an instruction for the mystical practice, I am going to give the discovery of a remarkable mystic of Prague, the same who revealed the mystery of the divine name, Yod-He-Vav-He, respecting the alchemical secret stuff, the so-called azote. This azote was a universal dissolvent of the alchemists for the production of gold, and is yet nowadays the greatest riddle to modern chemists. They suppose it to be nitrogen, which is still called in French azote, or nitrogenous acid, but the word azote does not signify other than the mysterious allusion to the letter practice, which dissolves anything material, i.e. bodily. It means as much as Christ's words, I am Alpha and Omega. The word azote is composed of the first and last letters of the Latin, the Greek, and the Hebrew alphabets, A to Z. The first and the last letter in Latin, Alpha, Omega, A to O in Greek, and Aleph, Tau, Hebrew. Omega is the last letter of the Greek, while Tau is of the Hebrew alphabet. To those who are interested in such alchemical scripts, I recommend the Rosicrucian work, The Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians. The second volume of this work contains the so-called parabola, wherein both the alchemical process and the whole mystical way are described. He who has but a slight notion acquired by the practice will find in these treatises safe instructions and evidence of his practice being correct. Such a perception belongs to the highest earthly joys a man may enjoy. In such moments we draw near to those of the old adepts who until now appeared to be very far in their strange sentences and symbols. In such moments their would-be nebulous talk becomes the most distinct of the world's languages, as the student then kindles the light to them inside himself. Their figures become more real, and we perceive then that those celebrated adepts were as much of flesh and bone as ourselves, and that our former conceptions of them were fancies, for like ourselves, they were possessed of their little human, purely human deficiencies and defects. They were no superhuman beings. as they have been made to seem by those who have not the slightest idea of the actual mystic. By this I do not intend at all to depreciate their loftiness as far as their spiritual conception and illumination are concerned. All the same, they were but human beings. Certainly, there are also in this world initiates who already have left their material and mortal body, and who from time to time appear on this plane in an apparently human form. Concerning this more will be said in the chapter dealing with leaders. It is obvious from the whole picture that Jacob Boehme too knew the meaning of the alphabet and the mystical practice connected therewith. Evidence of this are the few paragraphs I'm going to quote from his Mysterium Magnum, this work being the explanation of the first book of Moses. The spirits of the alphabet's letters are the form of the uniform spirit in the natural language. The 5 vowels derive their origin from the name of Jehovah, out of whom the Holy Spirit speaks, for these 5 vowels are the sacred name of God, conforming to his holiness. For the name Jehovah has but the 5 vowels, I, E, O, U, A. The remaining letters signify and express nature, i.e., what the divine name is, in the word created in nature, in love and wrath, in the darkness and the light. But these 5 vowels only signify what God is in the light of holiness, for nature is tinged by those 5 vowels to the realm of joy, to be the realm of joy. That the ancient wise men who understood these languages added to the name Jehovah an H, calling him Jehovah, happened as a piece of great sagacity, for this very H makes the sacred name of God composed of 5 vowels visible in outer nature. It shows how the sacred name of God is breathed into the creature and how it reveals itself therein. Those 5 vowels form the hidden name of God who dwells in himself, while the H signifies the divine joy or wisdom, and how this divine joy is exhaled out of itself. There is no doubt whatever that the mystical way and the means of reaching it, as stated in the present book, always have been and are the way of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, that is the loftiest community in the universe. Likewise, it is certain that he who sets out on this way and perseveres therein will solve in his interior the mystery of the rose and the cross, about which nothing can be told to the profane. Try it, and then you will know it. Here is to be mentioned that the Christ's way honestly trod deliverers of sins. Those who cannot understand this, presuming that the so-called karma, or the law of recompense, must be affected, are reminded of the words in the Lord's Prayer, and forgive us our sins. This prayer was imparted by Christ to his disciples, and he surely knew its importance better than anybody else. He who believes will be forgiven. Who does not believe in his words shall not be forgiven. Faith is a magical clue to everything in the worlds invisible. Without it, not even the lowest realm may be entered, much less the highest one. If some are led astray by the wrongly expounded doctrine of karma, then they cannot be helped. They will reap what they have sown. It is as with people who during their lifetime did not believe in any life after death. When they die, they are ignorant of it, and sometimes err for centuries in the dark regions until they understand after long suffering what has happened with them. Therefore, once more I repeat, faith is the fundamental base of the earthly and spiritual life. He who has no faith has nothing. And such a one who had not even what is required for this earthly life could not exist at all on this plane. Everybody without exception believes he will get up the next morning alive and safe. This faith of his influences, without his being conscious thereof, his organs, enabling him to overcome many diseases and dangers. Without this faith in tomorrow, man would sooner or later perish. So it is with faith in other things, be they small or large. We know well what Christ said of faith, and what he said thereof is a literal truth. Now I am going to quote some extracts from Kerning's works, which I hope will be appreciated by all friends of the mystic lore, as his works have not yet been translated from German into another language. What is the spirit properly composed of? He consists of feeling, love, and hate. He is dwelling in man's heart, bestowing on him a certain character. His whole basis is language. He built up man for speaking, in order that the latter could approach him by means of language and become one with him. His elements are the letters, words are the indication of his conceptions, and ideas from which the mind and the intellect derive their origin. But how may we know the spirit? By introversion, hearing, and feeling. But he who would only introvert would never gain the vibrations and the elasticity of life which are necessary for thinking. He would never feel any joy or love, and could not rise to something higher. He would stare at the eternal ether and would lose himself in the blue of the heavens, or in the stars without number. He who would but listen would not see the blue and starred heaven. All colors, forms, and the beauty of nature were lost for him, and he would not have any positive means to preserve at will his individuality. And what would he have, who should but feel? Such a one would dissolve himself, being submerged in pains and joys, and would renounce his independence. Seeing, hearing, and feeling are life powers, which when once associated must succeed in obtaining the entrance into the sanctuary of life. But of course this seeing, hearing, and feeling are not only to be used outwardly, but inwardly as well, into the innermost bowels, even to the marrow of the bones. Then we shall be nearing the powers of life, and dare ask them for the light, the truth, and protection. The mouth is the creative organ of the inner life, spiritual. The mouth, as a material instrument of language, is to know how to send letters and words into the depths and foundations, out of which shall grow lips, teeth, and palate. Then the whole body will have arisen outwardly and inwardly to the language and the faculty of thinking. Ourself, when uttered into our interior, will gain the faculty to be in any part of our body, and on any altar to there lay down its wishes. This is a complete lore for an unprejudiced man, for it is in strict conformity with anything we do in the world. A prejudiced person, however, cannot be helped by the longest expoundings or whole libraries. He who has the courage to consider the elements of the language uttered by the mouth, as well as the syllables and letters, as a kind of a bodily food, and who can swallow them, will soon feel what a wonderful food he has taken, and how necessary it is to feed the spiritual life, not only with puzzling conceptions, but with elementary powers. The tuning instrument I am about to speak of was at all times considered by many people to be a mere dream, and only a few understood it, while those who were in fact using it can be counted on the fingers. I would not therefore mention it if it were not your intention to travel for India, where this instrument exists to this day among the Brahmins. You who are going as missionaries to India, intending to propagate there the new spiritual lore, should know this to avoid being attacked with unknown weapons. It is the art of tuning oneself with words. Each Brahmin, on attaining a certain degree, receives from his superior a special word to be used as a tuning instrument in all circumstances, as at prayers, at a speech when supporting and comforting the unfortunate, the sick, etc. The first church fathers used this instrument with the best results, and it only lies with you to make such a word feel and think within yourself. Then you will see that its effect is as sure and infallible as nothing else in the whole creation. I would like to satisfy you in giving you a complete instruction. All the same, I may say this much, that by means of this tuning, we create in ourselves a power which raises our existence to a point where we forget the passage of time, becoming one with eternity already on this earth. Kerning is referring here to certain sacred words, which after this student has practiced for some years, will be born in his interior. To such words belonged, with the ancient Hebrews, certain divine names as well as the names of some angels. Speaking is the loftiest, the loveliest, but also the most difficult art of human life. But it has already stated before that by actual speaking is by no means meant the uttering of common matters, as the daily news or scientific treatises, but the free coming forth of our inmost thoughts and feelings. This way of speaking is then a manifestation of that mental stage into which the tuning has placed us, and which takes up all sounds about it, then developing thoughts and ideas of which the speaker had often not the slightest notion before. We have spoken of the 5 ways of tuning oneself for a speech, through the impression of the objects and circumstances surrounding ourselves, through looking at or touching any tuning instruments, through the aptitude of our hands and limbs as they may form different shapes, and through the positions of our body as well as touching the same with our fingers and hands, through the imagination of such tuning instruments by our fancy and thinking, through a word thought into ourselves which arouses and animates the speaking in an elementary and powerful way. The 5th way to tune oneself with words is the keystone of thinking, the crown of liberty, the unquenchable light of the wise, the so much misunderstood stone of philosophers, which fooled so many of the unwise, and the clue to the understanding of God. The loftiest quality in man, which we have to consider as the source of all his magnificent gifts of mind, of the reason, the regulated sensation, and the independence of his being, is, after all we have heard and said, contained in language. If we are in a position to understand language in a similar way, and to the same extent, then we have the fundamental cause of human knowledge, will, and feeling, not only within ourselves, but also in the creation, as a word, and as then the word is God, we have discerned God in the Word, in this eternal creed, in this preconception of all wisdom, in this ever-living philosophy, which is at the same time the principle of all religions and pre-religion itself. We have found a positive aim for our investigations, and the sight of this aim will preserve us from any confusion or delusion. To learn the substance of the language of the word in nature, first we ought to know that each vowel has its own particular preform. This preform is not bound to any distance or any size. It flows from one star to another, from one cloud to another, from mountain to mountain, from tree to tree, from stone to stone, from being to being, from limb to limb, into the inmost folds of the heart and all inward and outward organs of the body. If we learn to feel within ourselves this vocalization, then the divine spirit is given to us, and we are bound unto the eternal power of creation, which like ourselves is able to think all, to will all, and to fulfill all. In the word are not only all forms of the tones contained, but they also multiply by the differing sounds of the vowels, by the different interruptions with the consonants, and finally by the ingenious melting together of letters into syllables and words. In the word may be found all forms of geometry. Each vowel has besides its form of tone a peculiar form of sound, by virtue of which the vowels create their scale, not only to the height and depth of the harmonical relations, but also according to their original sound. This we get in abundance, immeasurable, and as the form of sound is far more decidedly expressed than the form of tone, it must act much more forcibly on our senses, animating them to a free language. To make the matter clearer, it will suffice to consider the sounds of the 5 fundamental vowels, I, E, O, U, A, which sharply differ from each other, and to compare them with the imperfect sounds of the musical instruments, which are always perceived as imperfect sounds. A high praise is to be given the musicians who, despite the imperfections of the elements, succeeded in the realization of a complete and exhaustive system of tones. But what is surprising indeed is that the scientists, the so-called philosophers, have quite lost the system of a scale of sounds, and in their blindness even deny its very traces, along which they might regain their certainty. In the word is the creative power. The word is the highest in creation. God is the creative word, and therefore the outline of creation lies before in the word already, and consequently, God is at the same time the will and the power and the wisdom. In the word are contained all forms. Each vowel has its own preform, which may be represented through association with others in innumerable modifications. If this is so, then any form must be a word too, expressing itself in the sensation by vibrations. Chaos was in a state of fermentation. This fermentation is an elimination of the coarse from the pure and the spiritual. As we see distinctly in wine, the spiritual extends itself when fermenting in curves and straight lines, in angles and circles, through the infinite reservoir space. Formed into a word, it dominates and moves as a free agent. Thus the highest faculty of the universe, the word, works in its eternal lines, forms, and vibrations, and as the coarser parts, though driven away by the word's power, are surrounded and penetrated by it. They retain in their formation the word's character, revolving round their own center, placing themselves in certain lines and angles to other centers, so designing, in this relation, the letters of God's creative word and nature and its forms. According to what is stated, it is of importance to us not only to hear the word as a tone, but to perceive and feel it as a form. The preforms of the letters have become lost in ordinary life, so that now the whole thing is rather considered to be only a fancy of enthusiasts and impostors. Nevertheless, such preforms do exist in nature, and anybody may put it to the test. There remains but the question how such preforms may be recognized. A mechanician, when beholding an instrument he never saw before, will examine its purpose and its parts, judging at the same time the machines and the means by which the instrument in question has been made, thus enabling himself to manufacture a similar instrument. Thus and not otherwise have we to proceed to. The work is before our eyes, and nobody hinders us from viewing it. But the mere staring at it is of no use. We have to know the means by which the whole has been built up. In this way, and not in another, we perceive lines, circles, points, and angles, the changing of the days and years in the infinite space of the heavens, studded with worlds without number. But this immensity rests on lines, circles, and angles, while its efficiency as word rests on the vibrations of the forms and in the graduations of the light. Lines, circles, and angles are therefore our elements wherein we have to investigate. Should nature's proportions be too large for our investigations, nobody hinders us from doing like the astronomers, bringing the objects to be examined in a reduced size, as near to us as possible. The astronomer makes a sketch of the immense firmament on a sheet of paper, calculating the course of the sun and stars up to a minute and second. Likewise, the investigator, if he seriously endeavors to find the truth, makes the lines, the circles, and angles vibrate within himself, measuring, like the astronomer, the firmament, the boundaries between time and eternity. To the aforesaid, I have to observe that kerning is here pointing out the correlation of the universe and man, i.e. the macrocosmos and microcosmos. It means that what is in the whole universe is also to be found in a man. And if the substance of the universe be the word, the same is consequently the substance of the man. But the word is composed of letters, and these are but geometrical forms, formed out of lines, circles, and angles. By making these pre-fundamental powers of the universe vibrate in our body, we realize our fundamental substance, i.e. the divine spirit, as well as the correlation of the divine spirit to the universe, and thereby the whole universe. A musician takes in hand a composition, studies it with his eyes without uttering a tone, or moving the lips, and then interprets its contents and value quite precisely. Another studies volumes upon volumes, imbibing the whole history of man, or a part of his scientific systems without uttering a single word, or opening his mouth. Are these not actual proofs of the eyes being able to see the word, conferring it upon our senses and our thinking principle? After such considerations, nobody will maintain that the following sentences are too risky for serving as a fundamental starting point. The form is word and light is word. Any fermentation is a self-liberation of the light out of the darkness, or a separation of the coarser materials from the finer and spiritual ones. Any action of the light takes place by radiation, consequently, by forming lines, circles, and angles. The whole universe is a great ring, an immense globe, and therefore a form, a word element. The word is alive, always active, and is creating without rest or stop. The lines, circles, and angles are the root of the word, and shoot forth branches of life and motion through worlds and life systems. The word enters the coarser stuffs and becomes a sound and conception for the visible senses. God speaks and man speaks. God gave himself to man, and thus man may elevate himself unto the word by means of the feeling. Music is ordinarily taught on an instrument, but as soon as one has learnt it thoroughly, then the instrument ceases to be of importance, for the student bears the music within himself. To some, their throat serves as an instrument. The throat, tongue, teeth, and lips are the organs for using the word outwardly. But as soon as the elements of the language stir within ourselves and manifest themselves, then can the outward organs of speech grow dumb, the hearing become lost. Still, in our inmost being, the live language remains and cannot die, even though our body dissolve itself into atoms. But how may the word be recognized in its pre-forms, and how do we receive the conviction that we have it not only in our mouth, that is, in our outer organ, but also in our interior? The mouth is an organ for the outer world, but at the same time it is a creative organ of the inner life. A man must get accustomed, as he speaks outwardly, to do so inwardly, as soon he will feel undoubted results. God breathed into man the live breath into his nostrils, said Genesis. Let us try to breathe in, instead of the air, the vowels, then words, and finally complete sentences, making them to penetrate our body through and through, and we shall soon perceive what it means to feed ourselves with the life essence. Have you succeeded to feel distinctly your inner life? Then you may inhale questions, awaiting the answer at your exhaling. That which has just been said could need a volume for its comprehension, but to a man of an earnest will a few words may suffice. We have already spoken of the word being a tuning instrument. Here it is not only an instrument but a power, and therefore he who is tuning himself herewith has not only a leader and a helper. No, he is ladling with his own hands out of the primordial stream, using it at his will. In the aforesaid, the author is dealing with the breathing in of a question, to which we may expect an answer when breathing out. It will be of use to observe that many young pupils presume, after a short practice or the first results obtained, to be able to arouse the inner word within themselves. I therefore request readers stepping on the way to bear in mind my warning concerning this point, as in the beginner is diverse lower selves may give the answer, which would not be the right one, and may lead the student astray, or mislead him altogether, if he should follow their advice. There are, however, instances when in certain moments the necessity arises that the student receives out of his interior a quite clear advice or hint, but this is an unproduced utterance, and quite different to the case where the student himself puts the question, awaiting an answer thereto. In the latter case, the danger is so much the greater, as the student is wont to be restless in such a moment, whereby a correct answer is not possible. We have spoken before of the vibration of tones, as the sound of the word is far more distinct than the common tone of music. Therefore the vibration of the first must be of a greater efficiency. Everyone who starts to practice will convince himself of the vibrations produced by thought letters or words. Their effect is so mighty that the student is oft amazed. Tone and sound reinforce their efficiency in a reversed relation, so that with the tone the vibrations are mightier of tone, while with the sound they are mightier of form. This is the very riddle of the Sphinx, the simple but deeply concealed mystery of God and nature. Cleverness cannot solve it, while it was always open to the simple mind. Listen to a tone and imagine its form, and the vibration will be more powerful. The word acts deeply concealed as God's sanctuary. The tone is also part of the word, but it is rather in love with the senses, flattering them with lovely melodies. He who can comprehend it, let him comprehend. The time will perhaps come when it will be allowed to explain more distinctly, when everyone will have to look for it within himself, considering it his own property. What is prophecy? It is the manifestation of the awakened spirit of genius imparted to the outwardly material man. He will manifest himself to us as soon as we have put aside all we have heard, seen, learnt, and kept in our mind, and when we renounce all earthly passions and desires by overcoming them, giving place to the inward life, enabling the latter to move and stir, and teach us by feeling, speaking, and seeing. The personality of Christ is objective, while his spirit is subjective. Without its spirit, the personality is of no value. Christ himself says hereof, the more we are occupied with his personality, the less we comprehend his spirit. But the more we understand his spirit, the more comforting is his personality to us. For becoming our ideal and prototype, it enters ourselves, transforming them in his way. The last sentence contains a certain mystery of the mystical evolution, namely the transformation of the man earthly into a heavenly one. This heavenly or divine man is stamped upon or poured into the mystic's soul, transforming his interior. Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. What do the children do first? They learn to speak first letters, then syllables, then words. Everyone shall do so within himself. IAO is the root of the word, is God. The lips are the representatives of the skin and the muscles of a man. The teeth are the sucking branches of the osseous system. The tongue is in closest touch with the inner organs of the body, as the veins, the blood, and even the nerves. The palate is always either in a furthest angle or in the center of a thing. These instructions given by Kerning are very important for a practical mystic, as they are the clue to the mystery of the outer nature. He who has learnt in his interior the alphabet and the inner word is in a position to carry this procedure through an outward nature too, awakening there the voices of things living and unliving. For the whole of nature speaks to an initiate. Therefore many brothers of the Rosy Cross are said to have understood the language of the animals. But this clue may not be used except by one who has found it within himself. For the majority of people, this teaching is senseless and valueless. To show the profound symbols hidden in these mysteries, I have but to point to the symbol of this circle with a point in its center. Every occultist knows it to be the sign of the sun, but that is not all, for the sun is at the same time the material symbol of God, and therefore the circle with the point is also a symbol of God manifested or revealed. The point in the center is, according to the above teaching or kerning, the palette. The periphery of the circle is the outward manifestation, or the creation. With the palette we may utter the letters GH, KH. Therefore our ancestors added to the divine name an H at the end, Jehovah. For this letter means the manifesting power. The same applies to the letters KH and G. The letters GH has the mightiest effects of vibration on all three worlds. Thus it is with all other letters, and he who succeeds in finding the corresponding organs of the language in the natural forms shall hear nature's language. All that exists bears the stamp of these four organic elements. Everything has an exterior, a fastness, an interior, and a middle. We feel the upper layer of earth when brought into our imagination as the lip, the mountains with their rocks extending over the whole globe as teeth and bones. Behind this skeleton, we feel the tongue, while the center of the globe we may imagine only by means of our palate. He who brings about imagining these speaking elements of nature in his interior, but in correspondence with the speaking elements of his organism, obtains the key to the comprehension of outward nature. Further on in the pages of the book quoted, kerning proves the mental impressions everyone may feel, unless he is full of prejudices, as is generally the case with an untrue philosopher. If you imagine the top of a steeple, where do you feel it? Of course, in my head. And the base of a steeple? Strange, my feet. And if you imagine a branch of this tree, in my arm, and the roots of this tree, again, in my feet, I intended to convince you of the possibility of mental impressions, for without having touched either the top of the steeple or the tree's roots, yet you have felt them. What is the use of it? We have been taught from our childhood to look for God in the heights, whereby he rises up to our head, where we think him over and work him up until he dissolves and disappears from us. God is everywhere. The whole man, that is, the whole human body, has to learn feeling him. But then we shall have him in the whole too, in our feet, knees, thighs, hips, loins, belly, breasts, in all inner organs, into the marrow of our bones he must stir, and then we feel him, and feel our positive life and immortality becomes not only a possibility, but a necessity. The head is the top of the steeple, it is the cog thereon, crying out into the world, and turning at the most gentle breeze, it surveys all, yet is seen by all. In the tower itself, the clock is going under the established regulations, and measuring the minutes, hours, and days. But all this would not be possible unless it stood on a firm foundation and on firm feet. Think of it. Master Kerning constantly shows the fact that God is present in a man and his whole body. Consequently, as soon as we begin to see God within ourselves, be it through the practice in the mystical heart or in practicing in our feet, God commences to manifest himself in all our body. 99% of occultists suppose the mystical evolution to begin in a man's soul. This presumption is one of the greatest errors in modern occultism. It originated from a complete ignorance of the spiritual laws, or therein that these matters are dealt with by people who have never experienced the mystical unfoldment, not even its very commencement. The truth is just the contrary. The mystical evolution begins in the body, manifesting itself before all in bodily sensations of a kind unknown to any who have not started the practice and thus experienced them for themselves. Also, the evolution of the inward senses is rather a bodily one. Here the magic spiritual powers affect the organism, yet their effect is materially felt. Their act of affecting is secret and incomprehensible to a man until he has attained his rebirth. But the effects of these powers are manifested in our body. Turn your face to the south and imagine the sunrise. Where do you feel it? On my left hand. And the west? On my right. Where do you feel the country of our antipodes? In my feet. And the firmament over the antipodes? Also in my feet. But in a wider vault. Well, which conceptions are clearer? Those directly from the clouds, or these from below? The latter. Can you imagine anything clearer than the aforesaid? No. From the conception from below must penetrate the whole body, that is, God's substance. The purest conception a man can imagine and feel is the Holy Spirit, to arouse and refine the susceptibility of feeling in a natural way is self-knowledge, while the sensation is God, the perception of whom was the sole purpose of all founders of religions and spiritual institutions. And this is the foundation of the religions and priesthoods? Yes. Why then do we not see any trace of such a lore? Because it has been lost, and because we endeavor to obtain all this by means of the steeple cock. It is obvious that by the cock on the steeple kerning means the human brain blinding our eyes and not allowing us to perceive the truth. There is one God who will deny it. There is immortality. We all believe in it, but immortality is the most wonderful thing of the creation, and consequently, we have no reason to doubt about any biblical wonder. The human creature is not immortal. All of which it consists returns to the original elements, and the former individuality cannot be traced anymore. Immortality is gained when the spirit has produced within the creature a new and imperishable body, which unites itself with the creature, taking up the latter's feelings and thoughts. The purer and more distant the ethereal and spiritual body is from the fleshly, and the coarser the material, the more imperfect will be their relation to each other, and the more uncertain the state of the eternal life. On the other hand, the more material the new ethereal body is, and the purer the fleshly one, the more uncertain is their union, and so much the more sure we may be to take beyond with ourselves our whole individuality. There is a rebirth in spirit. The creation of an ethereal body by the spirit is the rebirth in question. This ethereal body is conceived like the fleshly in the womb and grows out of it through all parts and organs. The creation of such a divine body being established in nature, and its approach towards the creature serving for our refinement, it would not be consequently against common sense to conclude that, under favorable circumstances, the ethereal body, having but tasted of the corporeal material food, is in a position to become so corporeal that, being a human being, conceived by the spirit, it may leave its paternal roof, entering the outward world, equipped with human qualities. I have quoted this extract on purpose, as Kerning here touches upon a burning question of immortality and the most secret mysteries of humanity altogether, and that is upon the origin of the human being in nature and his transition from the material state into the spiritual. As we have seen, Kerning does not believe in immortality without the spiritual rebirth in the flesh, which has to take place in every mystical student. This lore is, however, in contradiction to the teaching of the occultists, who maintain that the soul of an individual survives the body to become reincarnated again and again. So we assent rather to the occultistic teaching than to the theosophical and to that of Kerning. Our individual faith during our lifetime on this plane is of a magical influence upon our conscious state after death. Who does not believe in the survival will not exist for him after his death. On the other hand, he who believes shall in full consciousness continue to live after death. The feet are the first rung, whence you rise up to your knees, then into your hips, into the navel, the pit of the stomach, the throat, and finally the head. The ladder is erected, now learn to rise thereon. All that you have performed outwardly also has to take place inwardly. The first climbing touched but the skin, and now we are going to penetrate the flesh and the bones, through the loins, liver, lungs, and heart, into the very marrow in order to come nearer to the desired perfection. The audacious climber does not need to step from one rung to another. He often leaps over 1, 2, 3, sometimes 5 rungs at once, to ascend so much quicker to the top. He gets rid of all ties and soars up like an eagle. The language is formed in our mouth, yet it must penetrate ourselves everywhere until our entire nature becomes the language itself, where God's word resounds and shows us the truth. Obey this word when hearing it, and undertake nothing without its advice. Then in truth, a new day will break for you. The powers being now known to you, it is but a matter of faith to learn what they are able to perform. They are immeasurable, and none has yet got to their bottom. The Eternal says, "Art thou afraid to think a lot of me? Look at the myriads of stars. I have set them there to shine for those who come nearer to me. Look at the firmament in its loveliest azure. I have shaped it to give a temple to him who worships me. Him who prays to me in spirit I hear, and it is already granted with the prayer. He who speaks my language speaks within me, and all mine is his. I must not tell you more. Now you know all you want, and it lies only with you to win it." In the last sentence, the great mercy is shown, in which any mystic participates, provided he has been faithful to his task. He who knows how to pray in spirit and truth, his prayer is always favorably heard, often at once. We cannot learn prayer in spirit and truth unless our whole body prays with all its atoms and cells. Of course, this kind of prayer is unknown to those who utter their prayer only with their lips. The prayer with the lips is of little value, for it cannot ascend to the Creator. The prayer of a mystic is animated by his faith and love, and is therefore of a magical influence. What are the elements of thinking? Reply: the language, the numbers, and forms. You have to learn with all your body to count, to create forms, and to speak. And then you shall understand the universal history and your own being. Kerning expresses here, before all, a new teaching, namely that it is necessary to practice all numbers and diverse forms, and observes that the student will know the history of mankind at the end of his practice, which means he may attain a clairvoyance as far as the practice of numbers and forms is concerned. The student shall not trouble about that in the beginning, for it will be given to him when it will be necessary. Only those who are lacking both in faith and resolution fear they will not know how they are getting on with their practice. But as Kerning says, everyone has to devote himself blindly to the mystic lore. He who lacks courage had better not touch it. A man has to possess himself fully. This is the purpose of any teaching, and thither we try to lead the student. Not only in his heart or head, but in his whole body a man must feel and know himself, lest he get mutilated and be incapable of the perfect life. Here human narrowness is manifest, for it appropriates to a certain part of our body more holiness than to others. Though we experience every day that no limb is useless, each is of use to carry out the Creator's intention. Try to keep that which you have, and think that where life exhibits itself most clearly, there you are nearest to God, but do not be one-sided with your powers, and be convinced that perfection must possess all powers. In the lowest tone are contained the higher ones. Descend therefore to the lowest apartments of your body, remembering Christ's ascent into hell to call sounds and powers to life. Do not rest until you have created everywhere within you a lens through which you may gaze at eternity. And do not care for the world which perceives but your head, and tries to fill it up with all possible dogmas, until your head threatens to separate itself from you and your feelings. Persevere and master yourself, else you are a crucified one, whose bones have been broken on the cross, and whose body may therefore not be taken down. Have confidence in time and be master of the moment. This teaching is distinctly described in the foregoing examples, for it will require years until a man reaches his maturity, when he will discover the essence of his life, to use it for his leader. Many impatient ones would like to attain the complete mystical unfoldment within a few months or a few years. This, of course, is absurd, and the reply thereunto is given by the Master. It will last many years, until the inner word is aroused. Before beginning to enumerate the so-called mystical stages according to which the inner unfoldment takes place, I can only do so in broad outline to prevent the profanation of what must not be revealed at all. I shall briefly mention certain Christian ceremonies examined from the mystical point of view, for they are but the symbolical representation of certain mystical stages taking place within each student. The most important of these ceremonies are the so-called sacraments, that is, according to the ecclesiastical expression, sacred rituals, which under their outward and visible signs should have an influence upon the spiritual side of an individual. There are 7 sacraments in the Roman Catholic Church, namely baptism, the Eucharist, confirmation, penance, extreme unction, holy orders, and the sacrament of marriage. The true mystic does not content himself with the first 2 sacraments, i.e. baptism and Eucharist, for he has to experience them all up to holy orders and the sacrament of marriage. This, of course, is to be understood in a mystical sense. The first mystical stage, to be experienced by the student and consisting of hundreds of sections and subdivisions, is called the mystical death. If one is to be born, then he could not have in reality lived before, but could at best have led an apparent life. Such an apparent life is the ordinary earthly existence of all common mortals, that is, those who have not started the mystical practice. He who has done so and stepped out on the sacred path has secluded himself from the crowd treading the wide, comfortable main road, and has set out toward the faraway summit along small byways. Thus is symbolized the mystic's errand, who has left the multitude alone, thereby escaping the ordinary laws, which the rest of humanity is subject to, for the majority of these laws have no more power over him, he being subject to higher laws ruling the spiritual realm. This happens so that he may say that he has overcome his last and most stubborn enemy, death, and may exclaim, "O death, where is thy sting?" The sacred event of the rebirth consists of 2 acts, the first being the renunciation of life, or the mystical death. Together with the mystical death, a whole range of other stages takes place, having reference both to the rebirth and the 3 baptisms. There are 3 species of the rebirth and the baptism, by water, blood, and fire. All occult writings mention that mystics and occultists have to develop within themselves the 5 spiritual, or as they are sometimes named, astral senses, these being essential for the finer impressions from the invisible world. This assertion is quite true. While with an occult student, the point in question is the evolution of the astral senses, it is not so with a mystic. With the latter also, in the beginning these lower senses get developed, but later on also the higher senses, by means of which the mystic is able to receive impressions from the spiritual world and even the divine. To move and live on the astral plane, is not so easy as the majority of readers expect it to be, who suppose one to feel at home immediately on entering that plane. The astral world is much more alive than ours, more lovely, but also much more dangerous than the material world. These remarks are by a friend of mine who was in personal touch with 2 Oriental magicians. As soon as the disciple has to a certain extent got used to the impressions of the astral realm, and especially to the laws ruling there, he may enter it without any material expedience, namely by the mere reminiscence of the expression of the impressions already experienced and by concentrating himself on them. Further mystical stages to be experienced by all students are the 3 baptisms, namely the baptism of water, of blood, and of fire. To the first one belongs the awakening of the inner or the spiritual senses. In the beginning, quite naturally, first the astral senses are aroused, but gradually also the higher are developed, until the student is able to receive impressions from the divine realm. These inner senses are the sight, the hearing, the smell and taste, the touch or the feeling. Under the ancient rituals, the student was immersed head downwards into water and held there for a moment, at an apparent risk of his life. At that moment, the eyes became incapable of tears, and the ear became insensitive. Nothing more can be revealed as far as the baptism of water is concerned. According to Philon, the Egyptian priests, at their nocturnal service, used to undertake a symbolical pilgrimage, in which they had to pass water. At the end of the pilgrimage, they saluted the rising sun. Thence we learn that the water pilgrimage prepares for the worship of the sunrise Christ. Not only those who are purified by the baptism, but a mystical and not an outward one, are worthy of gazing at the ray of the sacred light, that is, at the rising aurora. But this purification is not brought about by a man himself, but the God within him. Nothing more can be revealed as far as the baptism of water is concerned. It will be, however, necessary to mention the inner senses, among which the most important is that of taste. This I am pointing out to all those who intend to practice. As far as the inner sight of a man is concerned, it is of different species. First, the student is taught by his inward leader by means of symbolical pictures, which he perceives either with open or closed eyes, either in the darkness or by light, either before or behind or within himself. The spirit symbols are so plain that there is no necessity of being versed in the mystical literature to understand them. Any symbol perceived means either the stage attained by the student or the promise of further stages. Together with the inner sight, yet another faculty gets developed in the mystic, that of mystical dreams. Each student has from time to time certain very clear dreams, speaking also symbolically and identical with all students. In this direction there exist certain strict spiritual laws, as not only the phenomena of the inner senses, but also the dreams are the very milestones of the mystical way. The student has to note them from their beginning in a special diary, stating the date when he experienced them. As to the apparition of astral beings, this comes to pass at the last struggle, when the baptism of fire is finishing. But then all possible monsters assail the mystic, but he must not care for that, concentrating himself on his divine self. Thus he will always drive them away. Higher spiritual beings, angels, do not appear so easily. On certain degrees of his way, the student will feel their proximity, and may even hear them, but to perceive them requires the attainment of higher stages. The second baptism is that of the blood. Since time immemorial, the blood has been considered rightly to be a peculiar liquid, to be the actual residence of the soul, as supposed by the ancient Hebrews. All sensations, all phenomena of the inner senses, as far as the divinity is concerned, always appear in a burning state. The readers only have to recall Moses' burning bush, the vision of Abraham, and so forth. The fire is not a mere symbol of God, but it is his very substance. It is not an earthly fire, but a heavenly one. Just as the laws of gravitation and the power of attraction, magnetism and electricity, and all other laws of the material world govern the physical plane, so the same laws, but in a higher octave, govern the astral, the spiritual, and the divine realms. The Emerald Table of Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus confirms this by its first verse, as above so below. This sentence applies to the slightest details, and he who presumes its meaning to be but a symbolical one will be deceived. The reason of the great mistakes committed by the modern occultists and also mystics is the fact that many passages in the Holy Scriptures are interpreted symbolic while they are to be literally understood, and vice versa. At the baptism, the mystic is given a new name, while in secret societies, certain mysterious words of a sacred nature were used in case of need. The mystic must not reveal his name to the non-elect, for a certain sacred power rests therein, which could be lost at its disclosure. The imparting of a new name means the transformation of the mystic into a new man. This name is impressed upon the mystic with the divine stamp and remains fixed forever on his soul. The new name makes of a man what his soul expresses. Before the last baptism and very soon in the beginning of the mystical practice, a new immortal body commences to form itself within the mystic. This is connected with peculiar sensations felt from the skin into the marrow. This process is very important and known to the mystics as weaving. Then comes the covering of the head. Another great mystery, from the different alchemical and especially Rosicrucian scripts, it is known they often speak of a mystic as three persons. Firstly, he is his own father, secondly, his own mother, and thirdly, his own child. The mystic is his own father, for he has begotten within himself a new self, a reborn child. Therefore, he is also his own mother. When the mystic has attained the rebirth by fire, the last act of the great inner drama, the mystical marriage, follows. Jesus Christ, or the divine self, is the bridegroom, and his bride the soul, or as the ancient mystics called her, the Virgin Sophia. This marriage is accompanied by the most sumptuous and magnificent stages, until finally both the bride and her bridegroom take their places as a queen and a king on their throne to command the earthly world. That is the material body of the mystic. The inner word is infallible and incapable of erring. The reason of our forefathers having had such long lives before the flood was that the powers of the word created by the divine faculty were with them yet, undivided and unborn. Just as a young tree full of force and sap manifests its beauty and its growth and its branches, but when it begins to bloom, then this good power passes over into the blossoms and fruits. But as the mind was divided into many languages and qualities, the human nature weakened thereby, and the lofty wisdom of the quality descended into the spirit of the letters, for the inward was transformed into the outward. Herein is hidden the great mystery of the Tower Babel, the confusion of tongues. Now I am going to quote an easier expounding of the inner word from the work of one of Kerning's disciples. But the powers of the universe have their roots in the elements of thinking, in the letters, in the language, or as the Holy Scriptures call it, in the word. Proof, elements of thinking, nature of the powers. The thinking comprehends all things which one can imagine. The conceptions denote the science of the imaginings. Absolutely simple thoughts are such whose signs and conceptions are one, identical. Each power is a kind of movement. Each movement occurs in space and time, and thereby conditions, substance and form. The absolutely simple powers are such in which substance and form are one, identical. This simplicity is possessed by the letters. Consequently, they are the elements of thinking, the nature of the powers. In order before all to prevent a gross misunderstanding, I must remark that by letters, not the arbitrary signs of the different written languages are meant. No, by letters, only the character, the spirit lying in the letter. Ideas can be meant. Only the primal form corresponding with the character of these absolutely simple ideas where identical can be meant. A few examples will suffice to clearly outline this relation. If, for example, one unexpectedly pricks somebody with a needle, he will start and in his pain cry, I, in English, E. If one suddenly strikes a person heavily on the shoulder with the fist, in this case he cries, U or O, in English, Oo or O. If on a dark night a beautiful Bengal light burns, this sight brings forth as a rule a general A, in English, Ah. It will be seen that between the character of a pinprick and I or E, between the character of a blow from a fist and O, between that of a Bengal light and A, Ah, a certain agreement is recognizable. If one regards a little forget-me-not, one cannot think, You, how lovely, but I, how lovely. On the other hand, if one imagines a bear or a bull, one cannot think, I, how terrible, but oh, how terrible. In viewing a sunrise, nobody will be capable of exclaiming, You, how beautiful, but A, how splendid. Of all letters, the characters I, A, O contrast most sharply with one another, so that even the weakest power of feeling and thought must recognize their all-forceful nature. As soon as man dismembers the outward world in this way, so he finds that he is surrounded by nothing but letters. Everywhere is the word of God. Everywhere God speaks, in the heights and in the depths, in solitude and amidst sounds, in heat and in frost, in the great and the small, in the vicinity and in the distance. Everywhere whither the senses of man penetrate are letters, the word of God, the language of God, and man has nothing to do but understand these letters, these spiritual characters, this living scale, the primal forms of the word, the lingual powers of God, to learn to perceive and feel them in order to reach the final purpose of his life. The lingual powers of nature are for the inner life what the scale of tones is for the musician. The letters are the school for the inner life. Man must let the spirit of the characters so long work upon him until his life's feeling becomes powerful to the point of infallibility, similar to the musical ear, until God ceases to be something far and strange, and he is able to speak with God as with himself. Every tree, every bush, every flower, every leaf, every mountain, each rock, each stone, each spring, every star, each lake and the sea, the sky and the firmament, day and night, summer and winter, snow and rain, the breeze and the tornado, cold and heat, lightning and thunder, the hard and soft, in short, all, each form, each color, each sound, each movement, all things the senses can perceive, have their distinctive character. These characters are the lingual powers of God, which in the last instance can be reduced to the spirit of the letters, and this spirit must be taken by man into himself. This spirit as letters must man learn to feel and be sensitive to. Then will he learn to speak with God. Then will he build his inner life. Then will he awaken Christ within himself. Then he will become a child, a son, a likeness of God, and participate in all spiritual powers lying in the nature of the Godhead. God is the Word, and the Word is letters. How is that to be understood? Let us imagine a beginning of the creation. There were not yet worlds, beings, creatures, then anywhere. There was nothing but empty space, but quite empty this space cannot have been, else nothing could have arisen. Space was therefore filled with powers, and as far as space reaches it, was filled with this force without the slightest interruption or rift. There was then in the beginning nothing but a simple substance, a being, a power. Name it what we will, in short, a something filling the universe. Now if this being wanted to do something, to produce something, it had to be active. But every action is a movement. Again, every movement is a form. Each movement has its specific character. The simplest forms, the simplest characters. Consequently, the simplest movements are the letters. Therefore, as soon as God is active, he speaks. His activity is his language, and the language is the nature or the name of God. Language serves man for the building of conceptions, for the communication of his thoughts. This manner of use is a less important quality of language. It's true, but unfortunately almost completely unknown. Worth rests in its strength. But this spirit is the specific character of these movements, and man must learn to feel, perceive, and understand these characters in all parts of his body. Then he learns to speak with God. He becomes a luminary for whom all mysteries become clear, and is lifted up to the highest virtue, to love, to God. The art of letter spelling is the universal law of life, which can be put into practice in all life's businesses. When a man gets up in the morning, he should think letters into himself whilst he dresses. The craftsman can almost always, in spite of his work, spell into his feet. The female sex, in performing most duties, can in thought spell into themselves, and thanks to their finer nerve systems, they are much easier and quick able to feel the letters in the feet. Young maidens of noble pedigree especially would learn the thing in a fabulously short time, and when this art of spelling will once be generally taught, then prophetesses will grow up amongst such maidens like mushrooms from the earth. Business people and scholars have it worst. These cannot, in the following of their callings, think letters because their thinking powers are engaged in other things. It is absolutely necessary for these to sacrifice 1 hour daily in order to apply themselves to the spelling art. To whom this seems impracticable, let him think that as soon as a man has an eager wish, he always knows how to find time to realize it. Who before slept 8 hours, let him sleep only 7 now. The learned generally have more free time. Let a man employ 1 hour daily for the nourishing and awakening of the inner life by retiring into solitude and learning to feel the spirit of the letters in the feet. I-A-O is the root of the name of God. This root name we find in the mysteries of all religions. First, man must be sensitive to and feel I-A-O in himself before Christ. The full inner life can take root and reach the highest maturity. Besides the fact that he will gain the conviction of his truth, described in this book by the medium of his dreams and visions, as well as by means of the mystical stages experienced by himself, which conviction will give him the impulse and strength to continue in his efforts. The first faculty appearing will be that he be endowed with the so-called inward comprehension in questions mystical and matters appertaining to the astral, mental and spiritual realms, and finally, in daily questions having reference to the material life of the student. The student must not wait for a direct answer to his question, but he has to hold out through the night till the next morning, eventually remaining in bed after his awakening for a few minutes, and recalling the question he put to himself. Then in 9 cases out of 10, the answer will appear in his thought, quite clearly and self-evidently. The strangest is the fact that the mystical teachings and stages are contained in the poems of the modern poets, as well as in modern pictures and sculpture. How is it possible that these thoughts are owned by poets and artists who never heard of the mystic? But the answer to it is easy. Each poet and each artist enters, though unconsciously, at his inspiration, the spiritual world, where conceptions and ideas are impressed upon his mind, which he then embodies in his works without understanding what he is creating. Like all other symbols, the mystical student can also solve the symbolical dreams without another's aid, in the beginning only his own, but later on those of other persons. The Indian scripts say that karma merely produces certain life circumstances, which man is forced to enter, but that it has no influence on his free will. This explanation is not quite correct, for the law of return or karma, should it be effective, must also have to a certain extent influence on the human will. which consequently is not free. The so-called absolute free will belongs but to those who have succeeded in becoming united with God, namely to the initiates of the highest degree, whose will has become one with God's will. Hence follows that absolute free will is owned only by God. Human beings have, according to their spiritual evolution, a more or less limited free will. Evidence that free will is not absolutely owned by human beings is that all prophecies are fulfilled to their minutest details. With people of lower grade, free will is very much limited. For coarse, dark, and evil deeds are the substantial part of their individuality, as they stick fast in ignorance and matter. Such have very much in common with the animal world. The same applies to people of low, coarse, and ignoble characters. Their deeds are so connected with their gross and material nature that they cannot act otherwise. Of course, it depends upon the degree of his evolution how the individual distinguishes the evil from the good. The well-known occult fact that on this plane people are exposed to secret influences, both good and evil, bears witness that our destiny here is to fight, to decide for this or that. On the other hand, however, we know that there are factors deciding the majority of human inclinations. When, however, we admit that besides the automatically working law of recompense, karma, the divine mercy is continually stepping in, forgiving certain sins and erasing their consequences, and offering at the same time the opportunity for a thorough comprehension of the right way, then the whole problem appears solved. This divine mercy rests in the comprehension of religion. As soon as man has attained that degree of his evolution, where he comprehends religion, be it of the most primitive and simple form, certain spiritual forces have already been awakened, and his inner self and his substance, i.e. his soul, endeavors constantly and uninterruptedly to lead him to his primordial origin, namely to God. The higher a man ascends in his insignificant comprehension of the highest power in the universe, the more he grows responsible, and the more his moral substance and feeling become awakened, thus enabling him to distinguish between good, evil, and mixed deeds. Such an individual acquires in a smaller or larger measure free will and responsibility for his acts, but by means of them he begins to have effect on his fate, on his karma, which is not unalterable. If karma were unalterable, then free will would not exist. As soon as man has got so far that he grasps, at least partially, the spiritual laws and begins to comprehend at least an insignificant part of his relation to the Creator, he is then given the power to influence his fate, his karma, and to change it. Forgive us our sins. What do these words mean? Nothing else than forgiveness of sins, or the destroying of bad karma by God's mercy. The mystical way is not a way of the mind, but of the feeling. It is not in vain that the Eastern occult schools teach one to control one's thoughts. That is not to have hateful and evil thoughts, but benevolent and good ones. For just as a hateful thought affects the astral realm, placing there its seed, which shall bear fruits on the material plane, just so a good thought will bear good fruits. The same applies also to fearful and distressed thoughts, for they attract just that which we fear and before which we tremble. All, whether we know it or not, has its effect on the astral plane, and so is there that which we gather sometimes already in this life. He who sows such thoughts consciously on the astral plane will know its effect, will soon know its effects. For a thought sustained by a conviction is far stronger than an unconscious one. Karma can consequently be affected by thoughts. God in his highest will chooses certain men whom he marks out for his favor and bestows upon them his mercy. As soon as one has been given the power to carry out the mystical practice of whatever character he may have been before, he is also given the mercy of gradual purification and of overcoming all bad karma which may await him. the accumulated karma will ordinarily work itself out already before the beginning of this practice, in different sufferings following in quick succession. There is no mystic who has not experienced the cruel blows of fate, especially such as shake his soul. Karma, which has had to work eventually for 20 years, concentrates itself upon a very short period, perhaps on 1 or 2 years, so that one blow is followed by another. As soon as the way has been started, the mystic has slipped out of the influence of earthly ranks and laws which govern the rest of mankind. It is now subject to laws quite different. He who has only once started the mystical practice, and with whom the first initiation stages have taken place, has made a contract with God, and in each of his coming incarnations will restart the way just at the point where he stopped, to continue until he reaches the goal. Fate is the reaction of nature, i.e. the universe, upon man, karma, and the human will. When in harmony with providence can escape the lower karma powers, when thereby the mystic throws upon God all his acts, and that he does all without awaiting any recompense or repayment or fruits of his deed, then he will not create new karma anymore. All bad habits and in general harmful acts will gradually disappear from his life. There will be hindrances put in his way, so that he will not be able to commit sinful acts, for he will be warned in different ways and cautioned against coming temptations. If the student, however, falls in spite of all, then he must raise himself quickly, and before all he must not think of his stumbling. When the student has fallen, there will always come a quick punishment, which must be endured for reconciliation. This has been experienced by a great many, and is at the same time an evidence that a new karma is no more formed. If the student has reached a certain higher degree in his evolution, I hereby mean the mystical marriage, he is brought into such life circumstances that he may live for a certain time in solitude and complete separation from other people, as he needs in a high degree, for in that stage the highest concentration of all spiritual powers on one point is necessary, and for its attainment strict quietude and solitude are indispensable.